A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11, verses 15 through 19. They arrived at Jerusalem. Immediately on entering the temple, Jesus started throwing out everyone who had set up shop there, buying and selling. He kicked over the tables of the bankers and the stalls of the pigeon merchants. He didn't let anyone even carry a basket through the temple. And then he taught them, quoting this text, "My house was designated a house of prayer for the nations. You've turned it into a hangout for thieves." The high priests and religion scholars heard what was going on and plotted how they might get rid of him. They panicked, for the entire crowd was carried away by his teaching. At evening, Jesus and his disciples left the city. This is the good news of God for the people of God. Hear what the Spirit of God is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing to you, for you are our foundation and our hope for the future. Amen. Why do we need pride? Each year during the time of pride, usually in the month of June, I am asked, why is there a need for pride? Looking up pride or proud in the Bible concordance would seem to suggest that pride and or being proud is not a good thing in God's eyes. Should churches embrace the concept of pride tide? The word pride is another one that has different meanings and applications and cannot be categorized as appropriate or inappropriate without some context. Some of you might wonder about the selection of a passage from the book of Esther for our readings. The book is not commonly used as a source text. It is used only once in the Revised Common Lectionary, and the passage that is used is not the passage that we read today. Esther is one of only 2 books of the Bible that does not mention God. The other is the Song of Songs. This passage is often criticized and rejected for its misogyny. Ironically, that is exactly why I chose this passage. It was clearly written by men and approved to be in the Bible by men, so misogyny really shouldn't be surprising. What is surprising is the liberating message that is found in the text when read with discerning eyes and an open mind. The story of Vashti is often read as a spoiled and stupid woman who risks her title and possibly her life by refusing the king's demand to come to the banquet. When read this way, it makes little sense. However, when we read the story as written, without assumptions, it carries a message of pride and self-respect. Xerxes orders the eunuchs to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Most likely, this means exactly what it says. Vashti was to come to the banquet wearing only her royal crown, so the drunken men at the banquet could see her great beauty. It would be demeaning, and Vashti has too much self-respect, pride, to obey the command, even if it means being expelled from the palace or even killed. What is remarkable and suggests to me divine participation in this story is that written in this way, a way that lifts up women who self-respect themselves more than life. The theme is repeated later in the book when Esther risks her palace and even her life to speak up for her people. These are examples of the positive aspect of pride. The book is also an example of the kind of pride that God rejects. Xerxes is prideful and believes himself to be superior to all others. He rules the realm with a cruel hand. There's also Haman in the book, who believes that Jews should all be killed because one Jew did not bow down to him. He believed the Jews to be less valuable than himself and his ethnic identity. He thought it would be acceptable for the government to kill them because they were of no worth. These are the examples of the kind of pride that God condemns. The need for some people to assert their superiority over others has been the source of slavery, internment camps in the U.S., and concentration camps in Germany. It justified taking indigenous children from their family and putting them in schools to civilize them, and on occasion to kill them. It is used to lock up refugees that come to our country. The pride that says we are better than others because of our ethnicity, our gender, our able-bodiedness, our economic status, our education level, or our citizenship is pride that God rejects. This is not to say we should not be proud of our ethnic heritage, or our gender expression, or our fitness, or our ability to gain resources and deploy them. Our knowledge and the ability to apply it, our country has stood for, are all good things. The problem is in the belief that any of it makes us superior to anyone else. The purpose of Pride Tide is not to say that people who love people of the same gender or love people of all genders or are superior to anyone else. Pride does not proclaim that people with gender expression fluidity are better than people who are comfortable in the gender identity they were assigned at birth. The function and meaning of Pride Tide is to declare that people outside the prevailing norms of sexuality and sexual expression are not less than. They are not rejected by God, and they have the right to stand equal with all others. They should not be forced to ask permission to marry, or to obtain a home, or to work, or to purchase goods and services. It should never be permitted to discriminate against them, not even on so-called religious grounds. We, the Church of God, are called to provide safe haven for those who are marginalized by the dominant culture. The church lost the high ground when the leaders of the church became agents of the dominant culture to force compliance by people with the will of the dominant culture. Religion became the champion of declaring some people as of less worth than others in the eyes of God, and therefore undeserving of justice in this world. Only recently has the church begun to reclaim its proper role is declaring all creation to be worthy of justice and protection. Jesus recognized the exploitative behavior of the merchants and money changers in the temple, who felt themselves to be in a privileged place and to use the temple for their own profit. To fully understand Jesus' wrath, we have to know that the money changers and the merchants had set up their tables and their booths in the courtyard of the Gentiles. This was the only place non-Jews could enter to worship God. By setting up their market in the courtyard, they had pushed the Gentiles out of the temple. Jesus was enraged by this assertion of privilege by not only the vendors, but also the high priests who permitted it and benefited from it. Jesus quotes from Isaiah chapter 56:7, that God's temple will be a house of prayer for all people. It is the exclusion of people deemed less than that enrages Jesus and not the commerce. This should be a relief to those who have bake sales and other events in church, because it wasn't the commerce. It would only be if we choose to push others out so that we can use their space for our privileged purposes. We should worry if we don't make room in our worship and in our building for those that society declares unworthy. Organized religion has not been particularly adept at following the mandate to treat all as worthy and welcome in our communities. I am truly very often amazed and dismayed at the trappings we as followers of Christ have put on to joining the family of God. We have requirements to be considered for baptism. We have classes for the persons or the parents requesting infant baptism. We have rules about how the ritual goes, and even denominational breaks over whether or not it's by submersion, pouring, or sprinkling. The only post-Jesus baptism we have in our sacred text is the story of Philip and the eunuch, and is very simply done. There was an introduction to Jesus and a request for baptism, and that was pretty much it. Why do we make it more difficult than God does to join God's family? One reason is likely our need to define who's in and who is out, to suit our own sense of privilege. A congregation's participation in the expression of pride must be accompanied by the congregation's sincere desire to cease and turn away from its compliance in the denigration of others, from any behavior or barriers they have that inhibit the full participation of others in their congregation. Once we have taken down the barriers, once we have made room for all, once there are no more marginalized people and groups, then and only then will there be no need for pride celebrations. Amen.